Thank you everybody who's logged in for tonight's webinar. Just a few housekeeping things before I introduce you to our speaker. We'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so please put any of your questions for Rachel in the Q&A, which we can share with her at the end. And then any comments, or if you've got any technical issues, please just put them in the comment box. We will be recording this session, or it's already started recording, so that we can share that with people who can't make it at this time or in different time zones. Tonight we have the great pleasure, between wild welfare and global animal welfare, to welcome Rachel Hevesi, who's the director and co-founder of Wild Futures. So this is a UK-based primate welfare and conservation charity that runs the Monkey Sanctuary in Cornwall. And if you haven't been to visit, then I highly recommend a visit. So a major focus for Wild Futures is the exotic pet trade, and in particular the campaign to end the primate pet trade. So the charity works with several of the major animal welfare organisations on this, and is a regular advisor to DEFRA, the UK government agency responsible for animal welfare. Wild Futures has a focus on education at every level, working with schools, colleges and universities. The Monkey Sanctuary is accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, GFAS, and is home to primates rescued from the UK primate pet trade. Rachel's been working with primates for close to 4 decades, has got amazing experience, and I'm sure she's going to share much of that with you. She's spoken in the UK and European Parliament on the subject of primate welfare, as well as presenting and guest speaking for the Primate Society of Great Britain, and various colleges and universities, including the University of Cambridge and Oxford Brookes. She's also worked with various NGOs and government agencies in the UK and abroad. Wild Futures is also a founder member of EARS, the European Alliance for Rescue Centres and Sanctuaries. Rachel's currently working as a partner representative on the board of EARS and a member of the Captive Care Working Group for BSGB. So without further ado, I'm not going to take up the time. I'm going to hand over to Rachel, and so we can hear from her. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us.
Okay, and thank you, Nick, for the introduction. I will get the slides back up on screen. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. As I said, thank you very much, Nick, for the introduction, and for everybody for attending today. These things are always a little bit strange because I can't see the audience, but you can see me. But hopefully you'll get to ask any questions at the end and give me some feedback as to what you think. So I'll start with just a little bit of an introduction, perhaps expanding a bit on what Nick was saying about Wild Futures, just who we are and why we're needed. I'm sure a lot of people attending tonight will know that the planet is undergoing a biodiversity crisis, and primates are very much a part of that. And of course, by primates, I mean non-human primates. So many of the species, majority of the species even, are threatened with extinction, and a vast majority have declining populations due to human actions. The threats that they face are those that are faced by many species across the planet: habitat loss, trade, as in bushmeat trade, and the pet trade, and of course the big subject of the moment and of the future, which is climate change as well. So Wild Futures is needed because primates are under serious threat on so many levels. And as a UK-based charity focusing on primate welfare and conservation, we focus in particular on the UK primate pet trade and the abuse of primates in captivity. As Nick said, we have a sanctuary for primates in need near Looe in Cornwall. But underpinning our ethos, our philosophy, is very much a desire to have a holistic approach. So all the work that we do with primates is looking at the bigger picture, looking at primates in the perspective of their natural ecology, and with the perspective also of human behaviour. And the wider picture also involves our understanding of the needs and the way that we live on this world together with natural habitats, whether they be the non-human primates or others. So we also, as a charity, seek to live by example, and our flagship, the Monkey Sanctuary, also is the land and the grounds are managed for UK habitats. And much of our education work tries to bring the links of welfare and conservation together, so people can see that one cannot be addressed without the other. And the scope of our work is not just focusing at the sanctuary itself, but we seek also to share our experience, our skills, and where we can, we will support other projects with funding, and we're very keen that where possible also people working with the charity get the opportunity to collaborate and work on other projects to share experience and capacity. And how do we do it, and where have we come from? Well, Wild Futures very much stands on the shoulders of the teams that have come before us. We were founded in 1964, originally as the Woolly Monkey Sanctuary. So we have over 57 years experience caring for primates in captivity. In fact, the sanctuary was probably the first of its type in the world. So in 1964, the whole concept, the idea of a sanctuary was very novel. And today, many of the ideas and the principles on which our work is based are very much accepted and are used around the world. But at the time that we started, it really was seen as new and perhaps even a little bit eccentric. We started just with woolly monkeys. They were all rescue animals, but they were encouraged to breed at that time with the hope that that was the best way of giving them quality of life, and perhaps that they would be able to eventually be returned to a natural habitat. And the way that was done, and for us to become the first place that kept woolly monkeys alive in captivity long enough, not just to breed one generation, but several generations, and therefore forming a semi-natural social group, was by using and developing innovative social management techniques and enclosure design, which I can explain a little later. But over the years, we did realise that the future for the woolly monkeys in our care was not going to be in natural habitat, and that was for genetic reasons and also for a greater understanding of disease transfer between or potential disease transfer between captive populations and wild populations. And so we instigated a non-breeding policy in 2000. And it was at that point also that we were starting to get and see a big rise in the primate pet trade in the UK once more, having the pet trade having declined somewhat since the early 60s with the implementation of various international treaties. But as breeders and dealers saw ways of getting around that and focusing on captive bred species, we started to get phone calls asking for help. And so as we stopped breeding, we were able to then turn to other species and offer help. And as Nick has said, as an organisation, We very much believe in collaborating and sharing our skills and experience. And part of that is our work with, as founder members of the European Alliance of Rescue Centres and Sanctuaries. I'm presently serving on the board of EARS, and it's always, well, it's part of the fundamental ethos of our charity that we can share in this way and help raise capacity in sanctuaries around the world. And our welfare standards, our educational work, our philosophy, I think, has been recognised by the fact that the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries has awarded us an accreditation status, and we are the only accredited sanctuary in Europe. So, as I said, our holistic approach underpins everything that we do. We have a biodiversity crisis. We spend much of our time in our educational work reminding people that although when they come to see the monkeys, for instance, conservation is not just about the exotic, it's about our own environment and where we live. And managing our grounds and land for native wildlife and using it as an example and showing people methods of ways that they can look after and care for the land in a sustainable way, hopefully shows people that it's something that everybody can aspire to, and that it's also extremely necessary. We look to not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. So our sustainability ethos encompasses everything that we do, whether it's how we buy things, where we buy things from, making sure that human rights as well as animal rights are looked to. We compost all our food and the monkey waste. We use solar panels. We encourage and educate people about plant-based diets, looking at both conservation and welfare issues in everything that we do, and hopefully showing people, as I've said, that these are issues that have to work in tandem to be really effective. And where we can, we look outwards and sharing our skills and knowledge. In the last couple of years, this has been very tricky for economic and for COVID reasons. But we like to provide, for instance, seed funding to projects in primate habitat, working with NGOs and to promote their work, particularly in education and community projects. And a very effective way of doing that for an organisation that doesn't have lots of spare cash is offering skills secondment and skills sharing, where perhaps we can visit projects, or members of other organisations can come stay with us, and hopefully we learn from each other and benefit primates and habitats in that way. Our educational work, as Nick said, extends through to schools and colleges. We receive tens of thousands of visitors on site every year. That is in normal years. Things have been a little tricky under COVID, as we've had to take some really strict measures to protect the monkeys in our care. But we also run various volunteer training programs or internships. And these we're really proud of because we are training the next generation of conservationists and people working in animal welfare and other fields. And one very effective programme that we've been running for the last few years has been with the European Solidarity Corps under Erasmus+. And we'll take up to 5 young people for 12 months, and they will train with us, and it can be as caregivers or on education, or they may focus on the site and sustainability work. And these are 5 of our last cohort. We have a wonderful new group with us right now. But just as an example of how it works and how proud we are of this, These 5 young women have all graduated successfully from us. 3 of them are now working in conservation and animal welfare. One of them is now gone on to do a PhD, and the 5th has actually joined our team on a permanent contract. But the primate pet trade and why it is a major focus for Wild Futures. We wish it wasn't, and we would love to be in a position where, as a charity, we were working much more on a theoretical level or a practical level, fundraising for projects around the world. But as long as there is a UK pet trade and a sanctuary is required in the UK, then we will be around to do our best to raise the issues involved and protect primates from this really sad life. The pictures that you see on the screen here are all of situations, cages and monkeys who have been rescued by Wild Futures from the UK trade. And you can see we're passionate about this. We've been campaigning really hard for nearly 20 years. And we're closer now to seeing an end to the trade in the UK than we've ever been before. There is a bill going through Parliament at present, which is the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill, which promises great things. We're not quite sure whether we should be cheering or jeering, crying or cheering. This is really we're in a really tricky place and a critical place with this right now. How we've got here, it's been hard work, but it's not been us on our own, and it's certainly not been me on my own. This has been about having a fantastic team at Wild Futures and about us collaborating and building relationships with lots of other organisations in the UK. In particular with the RSPCA, we've written reports with the RSPCA, with I4 on our own behalf, with Animal Defenders International. We have collaborated on petitions and presented tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of signatures to Number 10, all supporting the principle that the primate pet trade in the UK must be ended. We have produced Maury polls, which shows that the general public really support this issue. And of course, we've put time into research to prove why this trade has got to end, what the suffering is involved. And all of this takes time. It takes a lot of dedicated people. We have to find new ways all of the time of catching the media's attention and getting articles printed in paper newspapers, online, through social media, and only by working together as a collaborative movement, really, I think is this possible. And it's not just a group of people focused on, perhaps the NGOs focused on animal welfare. We also work with the stakeholders and professionals who also have that face-to-face experience with primates in the pet trade. And that includes the British Veterinary Association. And it took a number of years, but we are really pleased to see they're very much on board and campaigning with us to see an end to this trade. And to get there, as I've said, we've worked hard to get media attention and to also, within our research, to garner the support and the information and the understanding of all the people that need to know about this. We've been to Parliament several times. We've held receptions. We've attended APGAL meetings, which is the All-Party Group for Animal Welfare. We've presented to small groups of MPs, we've presented to hundreds of MPs. We've given official evidence for EFRA committees. We've presented on paper as well as through PowerPoint. We've answered government's call for evidence, and we've attended many a DEFRA meeting producing evidence for why primates should not be kept as pets. And keeping a high profile for this has been really important. When this campaign started in the early 2000s, we were simply told that it wasn't an issue, that there were no pet primates out there, and if there were, it was just a handful. And one of the fundamental principles, of course, that we had to fight for was that numbers actually don't matter. If one animal suffers, then things have got to be changed. They need protecting. And in fact, in working with DEFRA on the Animal Welfare Bill, what became the Animal Welfare Act, in the early 2000s, that was actually very much a principle of the Act. Numbers don't matter. It's the individual animal suffering that matters. However, sadly, we have been able to show that the primate pet trade does include thousands of individual animals suffering. It's not just a small handful. And so we've presented at Primate Society meetings, at universities, as I said, in Parliament. And you can imagine there are many receptions in Parliament with many lobbying groups or campaign groups trying to get people's attention. And so we had to really come up with imaginative ways of getting that attention. We were able to get Jane Goodall on screen. We were able to get celebrities, if you like Joanna Lumley to support our campaign, and get Bill Oddie to, in his own unique way, face-to-face talk to MPs about animal suffering and why it has to end. But really, one of the great things that we did was to have a wonderful sculptor called Rudy Weller, who was given permission to place his more than life-size sculptures in Westminster Hall outside of the reception room. And as the hundreds of MPs went about their business that day, they all saw those sculptures and they couldn't resist coming up to have a look. And therefore, our reception became one of the best attended of all time. And what did we have to explain? We had to explain to these MPs that this suffering and this story goes back a long time. Primates, non-human primates that is, first arrived in Britain and started being kept as pets in the early 1500s, at a time when the English in particular were going out and exploring the world and bringing back all kinds of new plants and animals. Catherine of Aragon reputedly had about 14 pet monkeys, and it became very fashionable for royalty and the nobility to keep primates as pets. And from there, there's been a continuous story. They were kept as mascots on ships. There's a very unfortunate story of a monkey being washed up during the Napoleonic Wars when one of Napoleon's ships was sunk, and a monkey, I don't know of what species, but dressed in French uniform, was put on trial and hanged on the beach in Hartlepool, as seen as a French traitor. And the story goes on. The picture that you see there in 1972, it was perhaps at the height of time when primates were being brought in from abroad on a regular basis, in their thousands, to be kept for both the zoo trade and the pet trade. And that little girl in the middle there is me on holiday in Cornwall, spotted by a photographer, and my mum being talked into us having our picture taken. When I look at that picture now, I see with horror that those monkeys' teeth have been pulled. Never mind the fact they've got they're in clothes, they've had their faces shaved. Just a horror story, and I and my family were part of that. Little did I know that when I grew up, I'd be spending my time and my passion trying to bring it to an end. But the trade continues. In 2010, as we were rescuing more and more monkeys, it was a common sight to see capuchins kept in people's gardens and in garden sheds. Primates continue to be bought and sold through the internet, through the media, small amounts through breeders and dealers, but increasingly just from families who can see that they can make easy money, particularly with the smaller species. Marmosets breed, they have twins, they can breed up to twice a year. Those individuals can be sold for £1,500, sometimes for £2,000 each. That's quite good money as a hobby, and so the trade continues. And in 2021, this is a common sight. If you go on to specialist forums and you go onto the internet, these are the kind of cages that monkeys are still being kept in. Here you've got what are called parrot cages. The cages on the right there, the double set of cages, those are actually in a downstairs toilet. The owner who had these was a young man. He was actually a student. He bought 2 monkeys. Before he knew it, they had babies. He moved them out of the hamster-sized cage into what he described to me when I asked him about their conditions. He just said, well, they're in very big cages, so they're okay, but I don't understand why they're fighting. And of course, they'd gone on to have several babies, and the more monkeys there were, the higher the aggression. And the male of the group, the father, started attacking his female partner and the babies, and causing some quite serious harm, at which point they were separated into 2 so-called big cages. But that's when we got the phone call asking for help. And of course, that the suffering that is created by this is because primates are just not suitable for keeping in a domestic setting. They have their own unique, socially complex needs. They are wild animals. They're not domesticated. And this is something which is really not understood by majority of owners. And we've never met an owner who has deliberately harmed their pet. The big problem is a lack of understanding. And the most fundamental thing is that because an animal is born in captivity, it doesn't make it domesticated. And if you have time to take a look, there's an interesting study by Driscoll et al., published in 2009, looking at pre-adaptations to domestication. And he bases this on various areas of ecology and behavior, social structure, food preferences, captive breeding, aggressiveness, captive temperament, and commensal initiative. And the more you go through the sub clauses of these areas, the more you're able to understand why primates are not suited to life as a pet, because they are not domesticated and they're not predisposed to any type of domestication. And so really, we can only describe what happens to primates when they're kept as pets as abuse. As I've said, this is not something which is usually deliberate. Animals are treated with cruelty, rarely with violence, but it's definitely regular. And the environment, the conditions in which the monkeys are kept are constant. Because the way that most primates are raised for the pet trade, and in the UK, is that they are bred in the UK. They are removed from their families and from usually from the mothers, in the case of callitrichids, from the family group as well. So the maternal deprivation, social deprivation of conspecifics, they're fed an inappropriate diet. They certainly suffer from a lack of adequate space. You can see the size cages that I've already shown you. And in that sort of environment, for a highly intelligent species, hardwired for complex social life and a complex environment, the lack of mental stimulation certainly creates huge problems. As I said, it's the lack of education and understanding by people and by owners that causes the problems. I've explained about the marmosets, and such a common story, people buying 1, 2 marmosets, not understanding where that's going to take them, and before they know it, things are out of hand. Monkeys are attacking each other and attacking owners. And of course, the cute pet that is needy, is emotionally looking for support and a relationship because they've been removed from their own, from their mothers and from their family groups. They'll be very responsive to the new owner when they're very young. But as wild animals, they grow, their instincts kick in, they try to find a place in the social hierarchy, and the trouble begins. The owners get bitten, there's a lot of aggression towards other family members. And it all comes, as I keep saying, down to the fact that as a society, we understand, on the whole, the needs of domestic animals. There's a lot of interesting work done by Sarah Hansen and Brooke Aldrich, both present and past Wild Futures team members, looking at, and what they did was to look at people's understanding of primate behavior and compared it to that of the animals that we're more familiar with in domesticated animals. And what definitely came out of their research is that there is a big gap in that understanding. So on the whole, people understand what a cat or a dog is trying to tell them. They know how to respond to it. Well, they absolutely do not do that with primates. They misunderstand both facial gestures, and body language, and sound. And this is how the monkeys end up in this sort of sad situation. Some of the pictures here, you can see just that's why animals end up in cages which are, to the expert eye, obviously inadequate, as in the concrete aviary on the top picture, and where owners think, well, yes, perhaps my monkey might be lonely when I'm out at work all day, so what I'll do is I'll leave the pet dog in the garden so that they can keep each other company. And what they don't realize that the dog gets frustrated and will spend the day circling the monkey. The monkey has nowhere to escape and becomes more and more neurotic and aggressive. And we have several monkeys at our sanctuary who have been traumatized through years of being trapped with an animal in this way. And then the central picture, again, showing lack of understanding of what is appropriate, and lack of knowledge of the potential danger of zoonosis. COVID, of course, has thrown up this issue big time in the last couple of years. And this is the picture in the middle there is of Mr. Monkey, one of the characters that we care for, a capuchin monkey that we care for at our sanctuary now. As a youngster, he not only lived in the house with his owners and shared food with them and sat on the table with them, but he even shared the family jacuzzi. And when you look at the potential for disease sharing either direction, this is really quite terrifying. But it's not just about poor understanding from the general public and from owners. This is also a big problem in the veterinary world. Vets do not get the time or the training to specialize in primates. Very few have got the background necessary to recognize and understand, and therefore to know how to deal with primates and the problems that are presented to them if and when they ever are brought in. And I should say that it can be quite rare. Most of the primates that we have rescued have never visited a vet or been seen by a vet. Common mistake, for instance, made is an owner will bring in their primate or report to the vet that their primate, their pet, has become aggressive and that they can't cope, that he's biting. What can be done? And the vet will recommend that they're castrated. It's a behavioural management tool, and it doesn't work. There's an interesting hormonal pathway in humans and in primates, which means that castration doesn't have the same effect that it does in cats or dogs. In our experience, we have definitely seen a correlation between those males that have been castrated and particular physical and psychological issues and lack of development, which has meant that, as well as the other problems that they bring with them when they come to the sanctuary and as they try to learn how to live back in social groups, they have an extra hurdle to overcome because of the apparent physiological changes and hormonal changes caused by castration. The other areas sometimes is vets can just simply be scared of taking action because they're not sure what they should do. The picture there on the bottom right corner is of a Capuchin called Missy. She was about 38 years old when she was brought to us. She had been in various so-called licensed sanctuaries, kept with numerous owners. She had massive problems with metabolic bone disease. Now that should have been pretty obvious. She had lost toes. She had lost half her tail. One of the sanctuary owners had actually witnessed the tail actually dropping off in front of him. She had huge dental issues and she had a massive parasitic load. She was definitely seen by the vet. The vet didn't know what to do about it. She was never properly diagnosed and therefore not treated. We were simply only able to help make her comfortable in her last few weeks of life. And obviously, cases like Missy are extreme, but the suffering that we see amongst pet primates is universal. There isn't a single individual animal that has come in that hasn't had some sort of behavioural and or physical problem. This is just one snapshot example and doesn't actually include the marmosets in our care now. And so they now are displaying more issues, more problems, particularly metabolic bone disease. But you can see that there's a whole range of behavioural issues that are common to pet primates. And this isn't just true at our sanctuary. We haven't got a small group that are showing extraordinary behaviour. This is common to many places and sanctuaries around the world who are finding just the same kind of things. So stereotypic behaviour, repetitive behaviour, pathological behaviour that can be attributed to the problems solved in primates when they're kept as pets. Most primates don't just show one kind of behaviour, they often have a whole range of these behaviours. And they're very much, they run very deep, they're really deeply ingrained. So by the time the primates arrive at our sanctuary, they have often been displaying or using these behaviours to help them cope with their situation. And they've been doing this for many years. And we always see some improvement. And for that, hopefully, I think we can be proud of the team that work with the monkeys and helping them recover. But some never recover fully. And there's always some issue that is left behind. It can be quite extreme. So we had one wonderful character called Josh, male Capuchin, who, when he was brought to us by the police, we were told he was super aggressive. And one way that he showed this aggression was actually that he turned it on himself. And when he couldn't lash out, he would bite his own tail. And he had bitten off the end of the tail. It was red and it was sore. There was an open wound there. The moment we started introducing him to other monkeys, he miraculously just stopped. He stopped self-harming and he focused on his new friends. And his recovery was extraordinary and it was really fast. He became the leader of his small family group. A success story that we didn't expect. On the other hand, Chanel, who you see pictured here, when she arrived with us, she had arrived actually with a companion. She had lived with another monkey, but her behaviors ran much deeper. It's like they were more introverted. So she was turning much more on herself. Her anger was turning on herself. She did seek and continues to seek a lot of human attention. A lot of repetitive behavior, jumping up and down, clapping, grinding her teeth. And then when she'd really worked herself up into a frenzy, when she couldn't cope, she'd then adopt what we call these sort of yoga positions, so awkward postures or movements that would require a lot of concentration. Something that we do voluntarily, perhaps when we do yoga, and what they do is that they help produce endorphins that help relax us and make us feel better. And that's probably what Chanel is trying to do. Her recovery has been much slower. All the monkeys at our sanctuary, although we are open to the public for some months of the year, all the monkeys have the choice to spend their time out of sight of the public, to choose to move away so that they don't have to be seen if they don't want to. For many years, we were not even able to give Chanel that choice, because if she was in front of the public, she couldn't draw herself away. And so we had to make sure that she wasn't there in order for her to be able to focus on her recovery and her relationship with the other monkeys. And it's taken 9 years before she was able to relax sufficiently that she could behave much more normally around people. So recovery and rehabilitation is absolutely dependent on the individual's character and their previous experience. And of course, they come with many, many physical disorders as well. Living in a small cage with an inappropriate diet, lack of sunlight, inevitably leads to huge problems. And of course, the psychological issues, raised stress levels, all of this feeds in and eventually can be displayed as a pathological physical illness. Metabolic bone disease, of course, through lack of sunlight and inability to make vitamin D3. Almost every monkey that's arrived at our sanctuary has had dental and dental disease issues. High blood sugars, particularly problematic through poor diet and lack of exercise. And how do we deal with this? I mean, behavioural issues, as I said, can run deep and can be really problematic. Morwella here has 2 ways of dealing with her stresses. One is that she will play with a particular object, but she can become obsessive, and it stops her from relating to her friends and her new family. So sometimes removing an object is sufficient, but always you have to make sure that you're not then causing greater distress because they have nothing to focus on. So providing interesting distraction, enrichment, whether that's social or practical, physical, moving groups around our territory. I'll be able to show you some pictures later, but the territory at the sanctuary is designed so that all the enclosures are linked by runways and tunnels, so that the monkeys are able to move from one area to another. And each group is regularly moved around the entire sanctuary so that the monkeys get a new environment, new neighbours, And all of that brings the kind of mental and social stimulation that is essential for them. Where necessary, we also use medication to help calm and relax the individuals, depending on their particular needs. Morwella, for instance, here you can see if she's denied the ability to have a physical distraction, she can turn on herself. You can see an ulcerated tail there where she has self-harmed. I mentioned diabetes, and this is an ongoing issue and a big issue for so many primates. And you would think that it would be diagnosed while these animals were pets, but a monkey like Grips, on the top picture there, when he arrived with us, his coat was soaking wet and it was sticky. And the reason it was wet is because he was excreting sugar through his skin and into his fur on such a scale that, and this is survival mode. This is one way of the body trying to get rid of high blood sugar, which is really toxic. When the owner had actually shown Grips to the vet suggested that he just needed to be bathed more often, completely missing the origin of the problem. Grips eventually required insulin treatment, and he didn't reach his full 35 years that a Capuchin should reach. He did die young because of the organ damage done by many years of living with diabetes. The monkeys also live, they lose toes, loss of extremities, they suffer sores and abscesses, they have respiratory issues. This is not a minor condition or lesser suffering. This is really is cruelty. And metabolic bone disease. This is something that we see more and more, particularly common amongst marmosets. Picture here you can see of a Capuchin. There's a monkey, Joey, who was kept in a wardrobe-sized cage for 9 years with no access to direct sunlight, unable to make vitamin D3, on a poor diet. He ended up with, as you can see, a concave rib cage, scoliosis, so a curved spine, a fused spine. His long bones were all curved. His bone density was poor. In fact, his bone density was so poor in his face that as he grew, his body was unable to make bone and so compensated by making cartilage. So his facial features were also very distorted. And you can see that somewhat also in the other two characters here, the photos. You've got Indy, the marmoset, and Gucci, Capuchin. And they've also got issues with metabolic bone disease, and Gucci in particular there with a cleft palate, which might be a congenital issue, perhaps caused by vitamin deficiency in her mother as a monkey who was used for frequent breeding. And again, both monkeys were seen as vets at some point in their lives, and both vets misdiagnosed the cause and the origins of the problems for this. So rehabilitation, well, the obvious thing, what do the monkeys need? They need space. So a picture here of our sanctuary. We haven't got a huge site, but we try to make the very most of what we do have. Most important of all, monkeys need each other. They're conspecifics. To relearn how to be monkeys, to relearn their language, their behavior, and just enjoy each other's company. And of course, they need a good diet so that physically they are healthy, and that then supports the rest of their recovery. And this is what I'm talking about in looking at their monkeys' territory and what's essential for them. So again, whenever we look at our enclosures and when you're living with the monkeys from day to day, we're always aware of just how small it is. For species that are designed to live and in a forest, to travel several kilometers a day, we can never compensate for that completely, but we try to make the enclosures interesting. We try to move them around. You can see one of the Barbary macaques there moving from one area to another. on the indoor, you can see some of the runways that enable us to move the monkeys as in their groups from one section of the sanctuary to another, creating stimulation, as I said, new neighbours, new environments. And of course, our climate provides all kinds of enrichment. It's not always so positive. Occasionally we get snow, and it's a reminder as to why these tropical animals really shouldn't be in our temperate climate. And what legislation is there that protects these primates? And what is it that we've been fighting over these years? Well, at present, there's the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, very much designed for human safety. Very little in there about animal welfare, with very little information as to how a local authority should judge an animal's condition. More recently, the Animal Welfare Act came into play in 2006, which contains at least a duty of care for the first time. We fought our way through this Animal Welfare Act, trying to highlighting the fact that it wouldn't be sufficient on its own to protect primates. Eventually, government conceded with a code of practice. We certainly contributed this, we helped to write it, but it's very much a code for experts and not for a local authority, for a owner. And it depends on skilled ability to interpret. And it also doesn't have the full teeth of a law. It simply provides guidelines. And that's why we've had to continue to fight for legislative change. There are also there's some international protection, which has certainly reduced the pet trade coming into this country, but not altogether. And then, of course, there's the Pet Animals Act, which regulates breeding and selling of animals. Again, the enforcement and understanding behind this has simply not been sufficient. We have, as an organisation, as a charity focused on the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, we survey the local authorities in the UK every year, trying to keep track of who is where, what conditions they're kept in. What it shows is the inadequacy of the law. Only those species under the DWA schedule need a licence, and government itself has admitted that there is an 80 to 90% non-compliance rate. So the vast majority of primate species that are kept as pets, and certainly the vast majority in terms of numbers, don't need a license, and therefore finding out where those monkeys are, monitoring their welfare, is next to impossible. And this is certainly true of marmosets. We can only monitor the trade by working with organisations like the RSPCA, relying on people reporting to us, and monitoring social media sites. So this inadequate legislation certainly leads to suffering, and eventually the government, and in fact all political parties, have recognised this. And in the lead up to the last general election, all the major parties promised to ban the trade and keeping of primates as pets in the UK. How they're going to do it, and how far they're really going to go with it, is a whole another question. For us, the most important thing is that government has to set the moral compass on this. Up until now, they have frequently told us that it's up to us to educate, for people to receive that education, and therefore rely on the market forces of supply and demand, and hope that the demand goes down and therefore the suffering will go down. I think we've finally convinced them that this is not sufficient. And that's where we end with our kind of cause for hope, by working together, by working our way over the years through the various legislative avenues that have been available to us, both in this country and abroad. We have seen change, and we are seeing change. The present Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill does offer some hope. our great fear with it is that it's going to simply allow a licensing of the trade rather than an ending of the trade. Because fundamental to all of this, and what we've got to recognise, and the governments have got to recognise, and as a society, is that in Wild Futures' view, is a move from seeing properties, from seeing our fellow species, seeing them as property and recognise them as individuals and having rights of their own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was very insightful. We do have time for a few questions. Hopefully you have time as well. So the first of the questions, it says, in your opinion, what is the best approach for a zoo educator to react to a child expressing a wish to have a pet primate when seeing a cute animal at the zoo?
Oh, I think it's a pit when it's a child. It's starting with the fact that getting the child to identify with that primate. The primate needs family and friends, just like they need their family and their friends. And they need to be family and friends of their own kind, who speak the same language, who understand each other. Just giving examples of for that child, can you imagine finding yourself in a new country, at a new school, where nobody speaks your language, where nobody understands who you are and what you need? So yes, get the child to identify with the primate, because children are very empathetic. They really get it once they see the suffering. But all they see is cute monkey in the cartoons that they've seen on film in the media, then that distorts their image.
Yeah, thank you. And
remind them they will get bitten eventually too. Or at least remind the parents. That's the best way. Remind the parents that they will get bitten.
Then they'll change their attitude.
Yeah.
There's a question just about the figure that I think you mentioned earlier. So is the 5,000 primates in private ownership just the UK?
Yes, it is. Yes. And the way that we've had to work this out is by looking at the number of licenses issued, looking at the number of reports to NGOs and to sanctuaries, and looking on social media to see the rate of sales, etc. So it's tricky, but I would say between 4,000 and 5,000 primates in the trade at any one time. Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we're still doing okay for time. I'm trying to get through these. With the new proposed law to ban primate pets, are there plans to work with licensed rehab centres or open additional centres like Wild Futures and the Monkey Sanctuary to ensure the welfare of confiscated primates? Good question.
We would love to do this, yes, and the need is certainly there. If this law is successful, if it has the teeth that it needs, there is going to be a big capacity problem. I have been speaking with DEFRA about this. They are after information about capacity, and the story that we're all telling them is that it's insufficient. Yep, so we are very happy to reach out, advise, help, because that capacity is needed.
Fabulous. I'm plugging through. I think we've got a couple more minutes. Do you have any advice on introducing primates? So that's a big one. That you might need a whole other session for this. You saw an almost immediate improvement in behaviour, like tail biting. Did you do anything out of the normal to help make the introduction the least stressful it could be?
Every introduction is unique. When a monkey arrives at our sanctuary, they spend the first 30 days in isolation, and that to make sure that we can do all the medical testing, make sure that we can treat them as is needed, make sure they're not going to give the monkeys that they meet anything they shouldn't. but it's also a time for us to watch their behavior, both for themselves, but also how they respond to other monkeys. And then the skill is matching them up to the right characters. And then it's a very gradual thing where they're brought closer together, but not within touching range. Eventually, through the mesh, we have a very highly specialized territory, which enables us with hatchways, with tunnels, for the monkeys to gain their confidence, for us to see how they respond. And when they're introduced for very small periods at a time, so that they can learn as gradually and at the rate that they need to. And for some monkeys, it's a few weeks, and it's never shorter than that. And for some monkeys, it's several months, and it can be even longer. But we're working on the principle that they're going to be with us for very many years. So there's no need to rush, because every monkey needs their own time. It's very labor intensive, but it's always successful that way.
Fabulous. Monkey.
If anybody has specific questions for the situation they're in, then certainly do come back and ask.
Yes, yeah, and we can help put people in touch with you if necessary. Another question, actually, just about the monkeys themselves. What kind of social groups do you have? So are they all same sex or mixed? All species in one group?
At the moment, they're only they're all the same species, each group, so we don't have any mixed species groups. They are usually mixed as well, so males and females together, and we also try to have an age range, different age range. That can vary. We do sometimes find, for instance, that with a group of very elderly individuals, they can no longer cope with the enthusiasm and energy of youngsters, and so the groupings can change over time as well. So there's huge variety, in other words.
Okay, and this is a really good question, given what you were just saying in terms about the veterinary profession. What could vets do to educate themselves more on primate health?
There are veterinary specialists, so do contact us about that, and we can help to put them in contact. And I would say visiting sanctuaries like ourselves, and we have actually run open days and courses in the past, pre-COVID days, inviting vets to come along and look at the issues and recognise behaviours. So yeah, contact us if you need help.
Absolutely. One more question snuck in just then. What are you doing to prevent breeding?
Oh, good question. Yes, as a non-breeding. We've used various ways of doing this. With the woolly monkeys originally, we were using the pill, and with mostly and implants, but that was not 100% successful. We needed to use the pill though because of the behavioral ecology of woolly monkeys, to reduce stress. But on the whole, what we do is vasectomize the males, so that they don't know anything's any different. Behavior can continue as normal, but we just can guarantee that there won't be any babies. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. Conscious of the time and your evening as well. So we're really grateful to you for sharing this evening and all your information and knowledge and the whole journey, which has been incredible. And there's some amazing comments coming through of appreciation from everybody who's attended. So and like I said at the beginning, anyone who's not visited the Monkey Sanctuary, I really recommend it. Beautiful part of the country as well, and amazing work which you've had some insight to tonight from Rachel herself. But thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. And as I said, if people have any further questions or want to know about a particular aspect in more detail, then do get in touch.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining. See you. Bye.
Bye.